I was recently asked by someone, what is the most important thing, Pastor, that I first have to understand about Christianity? And when I heard that question, I immediately went to the great doctrines of the faith. The Trinity, the gospel, the cross, the authority of the Bible. But then I realized that was not the question this person was asking. They were asking me, what's the first thing? What's that basic thing I first need to understand so that the rest of Christianity will make sense? And I thought about this. And the answer was, in my opinion, sin. Now, wait, don't touch the dials. Don't leave. Many of you are probably panicking right now. Like, oh my, we're going to have a week-long discussion on sin. Yes, we are. My purpose, though, is not to try to scare people into the kingdom. The Bible doesn't do that. But to have us understand the reality of sin. Yes, there are more important doctrines than the doctrine of sin. But doctrine of sin is a critical doctrine. And if you goof up sin, you're going to goof up almost all other things. From my experience as a pastor, about 90%, maybe plus, confusion of the Christian faith comes from a weakness of sin. When people ask us questions like, how can a loving God have hell? Why is there only one way to God? Did God really have to have his son be murdered to save people? All those good questions are fundamentally based on a false understanding of sin. Because if we don't get the problem, we will not get the solution. And when we as Christians look at the fundamental basics of the faith, we have to understand the problem of sin. Let me give you two examples from the history of the church. One from a great catechism. It's called the Heidelberg Catechism, one of the foundational catechisms, teachings of the Protestant faith. It described the Christian faith simply and beautifully in three simple points. First, how great my sin and misery are is the main point you have to get. And then second, how I'm set free from all my sin and misery. And then third, how I'm to thank God for such a deliverance. There we have the listing of those three basic points of the faith. First, the understanding of sin. Second, how I'm set free from my sin and misery by the cross of Christ. And from that liberation, how I'm to thank God for such deliverance. You find that throughout the Scriptures also, that simple pattern. If you take a look at Romans chapter 1, verse 15, the apostle writes, "So for my part, I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome." He wants to go to this church in Rome and preach them the gospel of Jesus Christ. And then he defines the gospel in a simple, basic term in verses 16 and 17, kind of the overview of the whole book. And he writes, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, 'But the righteous man shall live by faith.'" There, the clear definition of the gospel, the complete hope that we have in Jesus Christ. But go read the next verse, because in Romans chapter 1, verse 18, the apostle now begins his detailed description of the gospel, and we'll go for the next 8 chapters. And look at the first verse he writes in verse 18. "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness." The first thing he talks about, and for the next 3 chapters, is about God's wrath against sin. The Apostle Paul, when he wants to describe the gospel, begins with sin. Because if we mess up this first critical doctrine, we're going to goof up everything else. But there is, beloved, such advantage to understanding sin. Because if we understand the true biblical doctrine of sin, we'll understand the truth. We'll be able to have true confession. And that will lead to thanksgiving, which is a glorious thing. Amen.